Welcome back to another episode of the Adversity Advantage. I'm your host, Doug Bopst, and today's guests are husband and wife, John Kim and Vanessa Bennett. John, also known as the Angry Therapist, pioneered the online life coaching movement 7 years ago after going through a divorce, which led to his total rebirth. He quickly built a devoted following of fans who loved the frank and authentic insights that he freely shared on social media. John became known as an unconventional therapist who worked out of the box by seeing clients at coffee shops, on hikes, or in a CrossFit box. John's wife, Vanessa Bennett, is an author. She's a holistic psychotherapist, a clinical entrepreneur, and mental health content creator. She co hosts the Cheaper Than Therapy podcast, leads soul based retreats and workshops, and creates and facilitates curriculum for nonprofit, corporate events, and conferences. And this is going to be a deep dive on all things relationships, and I'm so excited to share this with you. So let's get this conversation going and welcome John Kim and Vanessa Bennett to the Adversity Advantage podcast. John and Vanessa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Doug, for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Excited to create dialogue about relationships and how hard they are.
They are. They're so challenging, but they're so fruitful too in many ways, obviously. Like, we need connection, we need relationships, we need to be in connection with other people in order to have a thriving life. And I know there's so much relationship advice out there, and I think it's pretty obvious that in order for a relationship to be successful, there has to be effective communication, there has to be trust, there has to be a basic understanding of each other's needs. But what is some stuff that maybe you both have learned in your professional life or even within your own relationship that you think often gets overlooked in order for a relationship to be successful?
That's a really good question, Doug. I think that it's hard to boil it down to like what's the thing, right? Like what's the one thing that what they need. I think a lot of relationships can have so many of the components and still not be successful. I actually think, and I am going to answer your question, but I do think in the beginning of the book, part of why John and I talk about how happily ever after is bullshit is exactly partly related to that question, which is like, what's the thing it takes? And it's like, well, sometimes it doesn't take anything. Sometimes it's actually more about us excavating this kind of bullshit idea or narrative that we've been fed by society that happily ever after is a thing, right? And that all relationships are going to or should last until death do us part, right? Rather than looking at relationships in a way where it's like, what is this relationship providing me? Am I growing? Are they growing? And then is it okay when that's not true anymore to maybe allow relationships to end when and how they're supposed to end, right? Rather than like holding on to them with two hands.
Yeah, I think for me, kind of going back to the book, the things that we talk about is swimming past the breakers. And, that's leaning into your own resistance. So whenever two people collide, with them comes their stories. There's going to be a lot of conflict, a lot of things happening underneath that we don't see. So swimming past the breakers. And then also for me, learning how to fight, because it's not about how many times we fight. It's about how we fight. We are not taught how to fight ever, right? So we're just kind of like walking reactions. And so people get into relationships, and especially in our 20s, most people have very explosive, toxic relationships, and it's because we don't know how to fight, And so I think learning how to fight, it's a game changer. It's required to make any relationship sustainable.
Let's unpack that, because I think that is something that causes a lot of breakups. It causes a lot of resentment and unhappiness in relationships, is the fact that people just don't know how to fight. They don't have healthy conflict resolution strategies. And a lot of it, like you kind of hinted at, John, comes back to our childhood and how we were raised. And so it'd be easy to say, okay, like, what are some ways that people can learn how to fight effectively? But if they've been taught toxic patterns throughout their life, it's going to be extremely hard to like kind of live in that current moment without addressing the past. So what are some of your, for both of you, what are some of your best tips to maybe develop some self-awareness around, okay, is my fighting style toxic? And like, where does this come from so that they can start to relearn healthy behaviors?
Yeah, I mean, I think at least for me, this idea of not knowing how to fight, it actually manifested and manifests right now in this moment still as an extreme aversion to conflict, period. Right. And so I think even that can be what somebody might say, like, oh, I'm fine with fighting. And then when I work with them as a therapist, it's like, well, are you, or are you just the person who doesn't rock the boat and sweeps everything under the rug? Right. Because so many people are like, oh, well, we don't fight. I've heard that so many times. And when somebody says, oh, we don't fight, talking about their relationship, it's always like, okay, really, let's dig into that, because that's not necessarily the sign of a healthy relationship, right? So I think what's really important is to build on what John was saying. We've really got to look at, where did this relationship to conflict come from, right? How did it develop? It's really, really beneficial, actually. I mean, listen, I don't want to sound like a therapist here, but it's really beneficial to understand the why. It's really beneficial to look back and see our childhood and see our wiring and why we are the way that we are, in order to say, is this still serving me now? And if not, how can I start to change that to be reflective of how I want to show up in relationships, how I want my relationships to actually feel, right? So for me, as the conflict avoidant, what that looked like in a tangible sense was paying attention to my internal bodily senses when there was any kind of conflict between me and my partner, right? So, I mean, it still happens now. I just have more tools around it. But whenever there's conflict, it's like I start to feel it in my chest. I start to feel it in my stomach. I actually feel myself dissociating, like leaving my body. I'm not even able to be present. I get hot. And then what happens is the dialogue in my head starts to go, this isn't working. I'm out of here. This is why, this is stupid. And I just start in my own head, right? Once you start to notice, oh, that's my pattern. That's the thing that I do. How can I change it? Then you can start to establish, what does that toolbox look like for me? So for me, right, it's staying in my body, for example. How can I make sure that when I'm in conflict, I stay in my body to make sure I don't dissociate? Somebody else's toolbox might look differently. And, what do I do to make sure that I'm not in my head doing my avoidant nonsense? And so again, that's a tool that I've had to learn to adopt. And I know John's conflict style is very different, and how he responds to it's very different.
Yeah, for me, because instead of running away, I tend to run at.
Yeah.
You want to run toward, I run at, right? So for me, it's joust and trying to be a lawyer, trying to be right, and all of that. So being aware of that. I always say to clients, if you find yourself in the same relationship over and over, and the only thing that changes is faces, then you you should look at that, because it's
Common
probably going to be the
denominator.
pattern, right? Yeah, and looking inward is hard, and I think most people don't do it until they lose something. So whether it is a marriage, custody, I don't know, friends, a life, you lose something, and then we want to change. So Vanessa and I are trying to prevent that to a certain extent, right? So you're looking at it before the crash.
Well, even your story, Doug, right? Like that was the same for you. Like it took that crash, right, before you really were like, holy shit, I gotta wake up and do the change.
Yeah, and I think we wait for these big moments to come our way, and I always say that you need to attach a why to change a behavior or achieve a certain goal, or life will like attach that why. It'll attach that why for you. Like I often see this in my profession as a personal trainer, where you can tell somebody that they need to take care of their health for years and years and years, and be like, listen, you don't want to be that person who in 3 years you end up pre-diabetic with diabetes, or you have a stroke, or I can go on and on with examples of what can happen if you don't take care of your health. And it's not until they have that heart attack, it's not until they go to their doctor and they're like, dude, like you got type 2 diabetes. Like if you don't like lose X amount of weight, like you could potentially die, very, very young. And then they're like, oh my gosh, like I got to change now. And it's like, I don't know why we wait till the last minute to do things. I mean, I'm still guilty of this now, even in some things in my own personal life. But I think the more we can be aware of that and really get clear, like have this emotional attachment. I think Vanessa, you hinted at this about like having the why, as far as like why you want to change something or improve something. I think it'll help get you a lot further along. And I think managing and being aware of conflict in a relationship is obviously incredibly important. And there are some like must do's, as you both kind of said. But I think there's also some like don't do's, where there's people that say certain things when they're angry with their partner, and it maybe takes the problem that's maybe at a level 5 or 6 and pushes it all the way to a level 10 based on certain things that they do or say to their partner. So what are some of the things that you must not do when you're emotionally charged and fighting with your partner?
I'll say one right now, and that's assassinating character, right? When you're fighting, there has to be rules, right? Like when you see professional fighters, people don't bring guns into the ring. There's pads, there's rules, right? There's places where you can't hit. So no assassinating character, no calling someone an idiot or a dumbass or, that kind of stuff. That's very harmful. Sometimes it's not repairable.
I actually had a therapist, a couples therapist in a past relationship, very, very clearly look at my partner and say, we don't call names. Like, that's just a non negotiable. It's off the table. We don't do that. And I actually remember that ex's brother saying, like, you speak to people that you love that way? Like, does that not ring strange to you that you think it would be okay to speak to somebody that you love in that kind of way, right? And this happens a lot. I mean, there's a weird thing that humans do where it's like the people that we're closest to sometimes are the ones that we treat the worst, right? We have this idea that because we love them or they love us, that they'll stick around no matter what. And we can give them all the bullshit and then put on the happy face for everybody else. And that's not true, right? All relationships need, I mean, we're not saying handle it with kid gloves, but we are saying, put your grown-up pants on and come to the table as a grown-up. Like, we're not toddlers. We don't hit, we don't, call names. And this is really how we should look at our romantic relationships too. We're adults. I mean, listen, it's like what you learned as a kid. Don't speak to others the way you wouldn't want to be spoken to, right? Don't treat others the same way. I mean, it all applies.
Right. It's the golden rule. And I think when you grow up in a toxic environment and you're around either two parents that have gotten divorced and don't get along, or you're living in a home where the two parents don't get along and fight all the time, you recognize fighting and drama and name calling. I think that's what you know is love.
It's your norm.
Yeah, it's your normal. And you're seeing the people that love and care about you talk to each other that way and even sometimes talk to you. So you're almost developing that as like what it should be like moving forward because that's all you know. And I think like going back, like we're talking about how to resolve like the way we fight in a relationship. There's a lot of people that just don't get into relationships because of fear, because of uncertainty, and because of trauma they endured when they were younger. So what are some of the signs that somebody has some childhood trauma that's kind of holding them back from getting into a relationship, and how can people start to heal from that?
Well, I'm just gonna say, everyone has trauma, right? So, like, trauma doesn't have to be war, sexual assault, physical abuse. I always use this example because it's so silly. In high school, someone stole my skateboard. Someone grabbed my skateboard and took it for like 4 hours. But the skateboard was something that I had to beg my mom for months. She couldn't afford it. It was like $120. It was like this big deal. I finally got it. I was very precious with it. And the first day at school, someone just grabbed it and took off with it. And he was going to bring it back, but he didn't bring it back for like 4 hours. And I remember the feeling of that. And even something that silly can be traumatizing. So no child enters adulthood unscarred. So we all have trauma. So it's not about like wondering, do I have trauma? Do I not have trauma? Trauma is included in the
Part of the package.
the package of life. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if that's the case, then it goes back to a little bit of what we were saying. How is your personal response? Like, what does your personal response look like? Right. And so rather than saying necessarily what is my specific trauma, which can also be helpful too, especially if you're dealing with like, we'll say capital T trauma versus lowercase t trauma, right? Which is kind of what John was speaking to. But it's more about, okay, when I'm activated, this is how I respond. And why is that? And how do I want that to look? And what are the steps that I need to take to get there? And also, it's remembering that, because I've worked with tons of people who, like you said, don't want to get in relationships because of, right, all of this baggage, all this thing I need. And we've also been fed this idea that you have to be whole and love yourself before you can love somebody else, which is bullshit, to be honest. We learn to love ourselves in relationship to other people, right? We're social creatures. We're relational creatures. And so it's actually in the mirroring back to us ourselves from the other person that we actually do develop our skills. We need kind of a sounding board, right? And so there's a lot of work that you can do on your own, but at some point you kind of have to dive into the deep end and start putting some of these relational skills that you've been learning into practice. And hopefully you can do that with some awareness that you've built, right, leading up to that, but you do have to dive in at some point.
Throw away that you have the whole thing, you have to love yourself before beginning a relationship. And I think what's powerful for me is that you have to like yourself before being in a relationship, because I think like is earned. And I think like is something, because we love people that we don't like, right? We have family members that we love because love is a choice. But to like someone, it's earned and you can't just choose it. And so if you like yourself, there means there was a journey that was involved, or you're in that process. And I think you bring more to the table, when it comes to boundaries, self-awareness, self-care, all of that stuff, which is really important when you're building a relationship. So yeah, I like liking yourself, working on that instead of the whole love yourself, which, can be a bumper sticker.
That's so true. And like what I was going to say is I think we've been fed this lie that healing is this place where you just get to a point, you put a stake in the ground, and you're like, this is it, like I'm done. And in reality, like I think you can move that stake like further and further up the mountain or up the hill, if you will. But like I think real healing comes, like you said, when if you've done the work on yourself and you've begun to maybe unlearn some of these toxic patterns that you experienced in childhood, or maybe some mistakes you made in a prior relationship, and you're now able to use those lessons to develop some new sense of normalcy when you're in future relationships. And I want to go back to the happily ever after, because I would think that most people listening to this understand that, a relationship isn't supposed to be like a Hallmark movie, because I think there's been a lot of information, a lot of books, a lot of content on social media that have kind of proven that to be false, and that relationships take work, they take time, they take a lot of things to make it work, and it's not always sunshines and rainbows. But with that said, I've fallen into this trap where you think you have so much in common with somebody from the beginning and everything is going so well, and you're like, oh my gosh, I think I found my soulmate. Like, I like this, she likes this, I like that, she likes that. Like, oh my, like it's perfect. And what I found is relationships like that often, like the faster they go up, the faster they come down. Because I know you talk about this in the book. If you could explain like why this is dysfunctional, and how can somebody know if it's dysfunction or if they just genuinely are compatible with somebody?
Yeah, I think sometimes the chemistry or the stuff, the locking eyes across the room or can't be away from this person, that kind of super powerful attraction can be dysfunction. And I think we mistake that as chemistry. And it's dysfunction because it could be one type of unhealthy attraction, like, addiction, Al-Anon, something that's I call sticky underneath. So if you're used to chaos, if you're used to something that smells familiar from your upbringing, and then the other person gives you some of that, that could be attraction. And people mistake attraction for, oh, my relationship's going to be great because we can't be away from each other because I'm so attracted to this person, or because this person is so hot, I know the relationship is going to be easy. And that's the misconception. I think we all know relationships are hard, but it's when we think that there's a formula. So the more attracted you are to someone, the easier the relationship's going to be, or the longer it's going to last. That's not true. Usually the more attracted you are to someone, it goes the other way. There's going to be more plates thrown at the wall, right? And so with Vanessa and I, it was a slow burn. We're very different, and we kind of had to build the bus, while we were driving it. It wasn't crazy lightning and, all of that in the beginning. And in the beginning, I judged it. In the beginning, I also fell into the trap of, oh, you know what? I'm not knocking Vanessa's knee-high socks off, and we're not like dying to see each other every day, and the chemistry isn't crazy. Maybe she's not the one. And that's from programming, right? When you build a relationship over time, it's not even about that. It's about tools, and it's about communication and everything else that we talk about in the book.
I was just saying to a client actually this morning, we talk about this idea of, and this is one of John's really amazing tools that I use now for myself, but also for clients, this idea of non-negotiables versus preferences list, and how it's really important that whether you're in a relationship or not, you really take time to make that list for yourself, right? Like what's on a non-negotiables list, which is like the absolutely hell no, not okay, right? Like physical abuse, for example, emotional abuse, calling names, like these should be things that for the most part, we all have on our non-negotiables list. And then there's preferences, right? I don't eat meat. I would have preferred I met the person who also shared in that kind of, non-meat eating behavior like me. But that's the thing that I can be okay with it if it doesn't necessarily, if he doesn't check the box, right? Now, those lists can be evolving, and they should be. As you grow and evolve, they can change and evolve. But I think like if I were to look at John and I believe that a lot of my preferences lists and him don't necessarily line up. But a lot of our non-negotiables, my non-negotiable list, he checks a lot of those boxes, right? And so when I looked at long-term partnership, that was more important to me. It was more important to me that we had similar values and similar ethics and these kind of things than it was that, he didn't eat meat or that he practiced yoga or whatever that preferences list might be. And I think that's really important for people to do, because you have to understand it about yourself. And that can be a really good way to, when you're in the dating world, that can be a really good thing to hold yourself to and say, you know what though? I might find this person incredibly hot and I want to screw them all day long, but there's like 5 things on my non-negotiables list that they clearly step over, right? And so what is that really?
Doug, this is new news to me. I didn't know that there's stuff that doesn't fall on Vanessa's preferences list. What on the list do you not prefer with me?
Well, like you always talk about how we're different, right? It's like part of the book we talk about finding beauty in the contrast. Like in a lot of ways, we're very different. And I think that I've had experiences with relationships in the past where a lot of the preferences lined up, right? The desire to see live music constantly, again, the food stuff, the love for travel, all of these things. But a lot of the non negotiables were not aligned. And so I had to really start doing the work around understanding the difference.
Doug, I think you're gonna have to take off your podcasting host hat, putting on a counselor hat. We're about to go into couples therapy
Couples
right now.
therapy, yeah.
Let me tell you how I feel about what you said.
That's funny. I mean, hey, man, I'm happy to have any kind of dialogue that will help you two grow closer on the
It's like,
podcast.
bring it.
I think though, with that said, you see a lot. You see a lot of people have the opposite, right? Like they might have some of these preferences in common, but the non-negotiables are just not there, right? Like you might have something in common where this person likes to go see live music, like you said, or they like to cook, they like to travel, but you want kids and they don't. But you're like, well, like we get along and we have a lot in common, but at the end of the day, like that, like wanting kids is like a big deal, right? And so if you get to that point where you're like, you want to have this conversation and then you get upset that that person like hasn't changed, like you haven't been able to change them, then you're going to be like super upset with yourself that you wasted so much time because you fell in love with preferences.
It happens so often, Doug. So often because we lead with our preferences. Again, in chemistry, I think can be kind of put on that preferences list. I'm not saying that chemistry is not important. Clearly, you have to be attracted to the person that you're going to spend your life with potentially. And, but it shouldn't be the number one leading thing. And I think it is for a lot of us. I also think that as like a society, we're very into shiny objects, right? I mean, we live in a capitalist society that teaches us and tells us to buy all the shiny things and the fast cars and it'll make you desirable and the bigger butts and the bigger lips, all these things. And so you can't just get away from that easily when it's the air that you breathe. And so we've been taught, the happily ever after again, that this true love's kiss from all the Disney movies is it. And that's all that matters. And it's not.
Doug, I'll be honest. A nice butt for me is a non-negotiable. It's not a preference. I can't do a flat ass. I just can't. I've tried, man.
He's lucky that I have a nice butt. Let's just put it that way.
And I'm just not evolved, maybe. But yeah. Before Vanessa met me, she said she wouldn't date men unless they were 6'2", blue eyes, and drove Ferraris. Now, and I said that was kind of narrow.
For those listening, he's totally full of it. Not true.
I love the humor, and I know that John likes Vanessa's butt based on the book. I mean, there were some comments in there.
He talks about my butt a lot.
Yeah. And
you know what's funny? So we met on a blind date, and on our very first date, she had a sweater tied around her butt. And usually, when people do this, it's because they're covering something
They're
up.
hiding something.
They're hiding something. And so I was like, oh, she must not have a nice butt because she's tying this sweater around it. So I actually didn't see her butt. I was trying to look and couldn't see it. And so I just went with personality. And and different types of connection. It forced me to be less shallow, let's say.
For the people listening, that they can hear that therapists can be dudes too.
I prefer the word human.
Okay.
Well, I think it's also cool to like humanize like some subjects that can be often super serious, and it just can make it a little bit lighter because I think there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of just negativity that's sometimes focused around things like relationships and love and marriage and all these therapy and all these things. And I think when we can kind of bring it down a notch and just have, some humor and just kind of like lighten the mood a little bit, not that like trauma is funny by any means, but just conversations like this, I think it's important to remember that we all are human and to not take life too seriously at all times.
Well, can I just say something? Because I'm glad you brought that up. That's the whole tone of the book. It's also, the flag I've been waving for the last 12 years. And some people are offended by me. Some people think I'm inappropriate, because I am a therapist. But I've always said that I'm a human and I'm flawed and I'm, all these other things. And so what we wanted to do with the book is to show two people who are therapists, but also real people who have their own shortcomings, their own struggles, and really kind of humanize ourselves instead of coming in, with letters after your name and all that.
Finger pointing, yes. And like doubling back to attraction, I think one of the other problems that happens when it comes to attraction is that, say, two people are interested in each other, they've checked the boxes in as far as non-negotiables and maybe some of their preferences match and they're physically attracted to their partner, like once they get settled into that relationship, like once the honeymoon phase kind of wears off, they feel a little less attracted to their partner sometimes and they start to question the relationship and being like, is this really love? Like, why aren't I as attracted to this person? Like, man, I didn't know they did that or this. And they sometimes like break up with that person or want to leave. How can somebody like tell the difference between whether they've just like left the honeymoon phase and they need to really just pay attention to why they got into the relationship in the first place versus them like feeling that they're just not compatible with the person and breaking up with them?
I'm a big believer in always turning the mirror around and looking at yourself first, right? So there's plenty of things that I could nitpick all day about John, just like he could about me. But when I'm in the place of wanting to do that, it's really important that I say, why? Like, why am I in this place? Because here's the thing, all of those things that you're probably annoyed by or like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore, they've always been there. And now suddenly they're bothering you, or at least today they seem to be bothering you more than normal. So why is that, right? Because they haven't magically appeared. And so there's something going on with you, most likely, that is turning them up, turning the volume up on them in some way. And so a lot of times we walk around thinking that our partners are just these like need meeting machines that should just be meeting our needs all the time, keeping us happy. We should just feel loved and feel seen and feel heard and feel validated constantly by our partner. And that is just simply not true, right? The bottom line is you might go your entire lifetime without having certain needs met. And the other bottom line is that a lot of needs are actually your responsibility to meet, no one else's. And so I think that relates to what you're saying here, Doug, because I think that many times if we turn the mirror around on ourselves when we're in that place of starting to kind of pick at the other person, there probably is a lot to learn about what's going on for you, why suddenly these things are irritating you.
Yeah, I always tell people the relationship starts when it gets hard. Just to simplify it, when things get hard is when you start to either build legs or jump ship. And if you're jumping ship and you don't look inward, you're always going to be in relationships that are very short term. And, maybe you never pass that honeymoon phase. So when things get hard is when you could now start to get honest with each other and self and start building something.
Absolutely. That's so well said because it's easy to be in a relationship with somebody when things are sunshines and rainbows are going really well and you really like each other, where it really presents a challenge and when the relationship like really gets real is when you have your first fight or you realize that you were wrong and you have to apologize for something or you have to make certain sacrifices that at the time when you thought you could make them seemed easy but now they're a bit more difficult and like following through with your word. And there's just so many reasons that relationship gets hard I think like you said, John, like it really starts when that challenge first arises. Like one of the other reasons besides like not healing from childhood trauma that prevents people from getting into a relationship is still not being over like an ex. Like how do you come to terms with failed relationships that sometimes hold people back from getting into a new relationship?
Yeah, I would say for me, breaking the pattern of tracing old love blueprints. So one of the gifts of me and Vanessa, at least for me, is I've never experienced a love like this because it's new, because we are working on redefining. If I was just left to by default, I would be tracing. So what I mean by that is comparing old love with the current love that you're in, right? And so one of the chapters in the book is finding beauty in the contrast. And so Vanessa and I are very different. But instead of saying, oh, it's not going to work for me because she's not like, my exes, it's finding beauty in this that I've never experienced, leaning into that. And then that creates a brand new blueprint instead of tracing the old.
I would say it has to do too with the fact that as beings, we are actually meaning making beings. We really like things to make sense, sometimes to a detriment. Like we like things to fit into a box and be very binary, right? This is a very normal human brain type thing. But because we are meaning making beings, I think for a lot of people, when they haven't gotten to the place yet where they're on the other side of a breakup or an expired relationship where they can say, what did I take from that? What did I learn from that? How did that relationship transform me? And maybe they're still in, let's say, victim mode, or they're still in, I want this person back. Like they're in that kind of desperate seeking mode. When you're in those places, you can't make meaning, right? And it's not to say you also can't force yourself into meaning making until you're ready. But I do believe that if we get ourselves to a place where we're able to pull back and say, what did I learn? How did this grow me? How did this transform me? And you're able to digest that in some way, that nugget actually will help you then move forward in this relationship. Because there's something that happens for the human psyche when you're able to make meaning. It actually allows you to slowly move forward in some way in your life. And this isn't just with breakups. This is with a lot of things that happen in our lives. It's important for humans to try to make meaning and understand what's gone on for them. And in that, there's an acceptance and an ability to keep moving.
And I think on the other side of that, like the flip side of that is people have trouble like knowing when it's right to get back with their ex or not. There's a lot of people it's like they break up, get
Oh, we
back
hear this all
together,
the time.
stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. And maybe like a percentage of them should just completely walk away. And then there's some that maybe were like, you probably might have been too hard on your partner. Maybe you got to work on these things and give this relationship like another shot. Like, how does somebody know if it's the right thing to do to try to explore getting back with their ex?
Yeah, it's one question. That question is this: what's different this time? And it's not, someone's appearance. It's not that she has, this or he has abs or whatever. If there isn't anything different, meaning there hasn't been secondary change that isn't reversible, right? If two people haven't grown internally, then the chances of it not working out is very high.
Yeah, the patterns are going to repeat themselves.
Yeah. So what's different? And you're right. There's a lot of people who do round 2, round 3 because they're lonely or because some time has gone by, and it always ends the same. So what is different this time?
And also build on that really quick. I don't want to make people feel bad also for going back to their ex, even if they can't answer the question that John poses, because I think what John says is 100% accurate. It really is that simple, right? Like, have you both grown? How is there difference? What is the difference? But what I will say is that sometimes we need to touch the hot stove a few times before we really, really embody the understanding that it's hot. Sometimes it doesn't just take once. And I also think we need to stop kind of beating ourselves up for the fact that, oh, I did this again. I went back again. Why did I do that? Well, you did that because you didn't learn the lesson yet. And can that be okay? Can it be okay that it took you a couple rounds to really, truly embody that lesson? I think beating yourself up isn't actually helping you learn the lesson. It's probably doing the opposite.
Why do you think people continue to go back to an ex when they know nothing's going to change, nothing's going to be different? Do you think it's insecurity? Do you think it's uncertainty? Do you think they're still like attached? Like, what do you guys think is the most common issue there?
All of those.
Yeah, I think all of those, but fear of being alone, the ticking clock. Am I gonna find love again? Dating apps suck. Might as well just take what I had. All of the above.
And then to go a little bit deeper, sometimes it can just be looked at as like repetition compulsion, which is really this like psychic need that we have to reenact something over and over and over again until we make it make sense, until it works the way we want it to, until we rewrite an old story or an old trauma. And a lot of times this happens unconsciously, which is why it's important to have some of these self-awareness tools, because if you are just running around doing it unconsciously, you're probably going to keep touching that stove and not being aware that it's hot.
So I think one of the things that would have to happen, let's just say that the relationship is going to be different that next time and you guys decide to come back together to resolve issues and move forward in trying this relationship again, is there needs to be some sort of apology that probably likely has to happen on either side. I would imagine if there was a breakup, there was obviously something that caused that, and apologies would certainly help. I think, and I've been guilty of this, that a lot of people, they just say sorry and they think that's it. And sometimes it's like a half-assed apology. What do you guys feel like needs to go into like conveying a proper apology to somebody?
I was going to say one word. It's actually not an apology. It's ownership, right? Because you could say sorry all day, but if you don't own something, if there's no action behind that, just saying sorry is not going to build any legs, or change anything.
Yeah. I think it's that looking in the mirror, right? Like, what part of this can I own? What am I willing to own? And then putting action behind your words, right? So actually showing the person how it's going to be different, how you're going to change, how you're going to, make amends, whatever the thing is. It's action. The action has to back up the words. Otherwise, it's just words and it doesn't really mean anything.
And I think the thing that goes into taking ownership is kind of escaping this victim slash blame cycle that so many people get caught up in, because it's easy to blame somebody else for your problems. It's easy to blame the other person for why something didn't work out. It's easy to just blame, 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 because then you're not required to take ownership. You're not required to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, man, like I messed up. Like I shouldn't have done that. Or I could have really handled this differently. How can somebody like escape that? Because I know it's not an easy thing. I mean, people have been programmed to do this for years and years and years. How can somebody escape the blame cycle?
I will say too that I have something that I say pretty frequently that makes a lot of people bristle, and I'm okay with it, to be honest. I've had times where couples will come to me even with infidelity, and one of the first things I do is I actually, I mean, in a little bit more gentle way than this, but I'll look at the person who's actually been cheated on and essentially ask them, like, what was your part in this? And let me tell you, that doesn't always go over well. I mean, obviously, I've got some strategy behind when and how I say it, but the bottom line is there's always two people in a relationship, right? So whether that was, oh, my part in it was, I started to feel disconnect and I allowed it to kind of fester and I was trying to not rock the boat, so I didn't speak up. Right. And I let that go on and on and on. And so this whole other life was happening and I like put blinders on. Right. There's always something that we can own. And I think that if we go into relationships really trying to understand that concept, it can help us get out of that victim mentality, right? It's the world of AA. It's like keeping your side of the street clean. What's your 100%? Right. And if we look at every single interaction, whether it's romantic or friend or whatever, as there's always something I can own, there's always something I can keep my side of the street clean with or how, then I think that helps you kind of click out of that I'm the victim. Life is happening to me rather than, and then you get to say, no, life's not happening to me. I'm actually a willing participant in this. And I've got some stuff I can work on and own.
Yeah, and this only works if both people are owning, right? It's not fair if one person is constantly owning and then the other person's like, I told you so. I told you so, And so then at that point, you have to own the fact that this relationship is lopsided and probably not for you.
So, like, what percentage of people in your professional experience have you seen that they're able to move forward and continue in a relationship after there's been some infidelity?
I hate to say this, but I actually feel like it's a pretty small percentage. I mean, I'm not going to have an exact number. It's definitely happened, and I've worked with clients who have been able to. But I will say that the clients that I'm thinking of that have been able to move forward are the clients where both people were actually able to say, this is my part, this is what I own, this is what I'm going to do for myself to work on myself personally, but also in this relationship. They go on kind of on their own inner self-betterment journey as well, right? It's not just about the relationship getting better, but it's also themselves getting stronger and more in touch, and so those are the ones I have seen actually be able to come out the other side, not without scars, but I have seen it happen.
Yeah, I mean, several years ago, talk about, I think you guys mentioned at the beginning that I was kind of caught between a sandwich of two therapists. I was in this crossfire a few years ago of two of my closest friends who were married, and the one partner had like cheated several times in the relationship, and I knew about it, but the one partner like didn't know because this other person was confiding in me, and then eventually the partner found out, and now I'm like in the middle of all this. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever gone through, because you just see these two people that you have so much respect for and so much love and care for, and you're seeing them just the marriage is completely being destroyed, and they're still married now, and their marriage is better than ever. And what happened, what made it work, was kind of what you said, is that they went to therapy together. They did stuff on their own. They took some time apart. They really started to work and heal on their side of the street in the relationship. And I was like, there's no freaking way they're going to stay married. I was like, and if you're listening to this, like, I mean, you know how I feel, but there's no way that this is going to happen, that they're going to make it. I just didn't know how it could possibly work, what had happened, and they worked it out. And
Did you tell or did you keep it a secret?
no, what had happened was I was like, spending time with the other partner who was being cheated on. And I remember going to my friend who was doing the cheating, and I'm like, if you don't tell this person that what you're doing, I'm going to have to, just because
I'm going to.
Right.
Yeah.
because like I'm giving you some time to like maybe come to terms with how you're going to do it, but I can't be sitting next to this person and talking about just real life stuff and us like sharing experiences and acting like we're close friends, and me not telling him like something that's like really, really messed up that is going on in their marriage, right? But it was really inspiring to see them come together like that, because I mean, obviously, there's a lot of circumstances where the other partner really had nothing to do with it. And that other person just was going to cheat regardless. But there are a lot of cases where you'll say, okay, why? What was your role in it? You're like, well, I can tell that I haven't been home as much, or I haven't been as emotionally connected, or I've been treating this person pretty poorly. And then it all starts to come out. And then both people, like we've said, can take ownership. It gives it at least a chance of being able to survive.
Well, and I think what you just said, what it brought up for me is I think it's really hard for us as humans to separate the fact that, like, you can own your part and it's not that you are saying what they did is okay. I think we've got to get better at separating those two things out, right? Like, I can still say, here's my component, here's what I did, here's what I own. And I'm also not saying what you did is justified, right? A lot of that work that we do as therapists, even going back and talking about childhood, a lot of the healing comes from just that. It's holding this tension of the opposites, right? Like, I can see my parents, for example, as flawed human beings, and I can have empathy and compassion for them. And I'm still not saying what they did is right, right? And so those things can exist together. It's hard, but if we can get to that place, that's where so much more of this deeper relational work comes into play, is really being able to find that place in a relationship.
And so I guess we've talked about a lot of things to kind of repair a relationship that maybe isn't going well, or to get better at like dealing with conflict or repairing some learned patterns that came from childhood trauma. I'm going to spend a few minutes as we come to a close of our conversation, like talking about like some good things in a relationship that can be done when the relationship isn't on fire. And
Yeah.
obviously, like I think knowing your partner's love language is important, knowing what makes them happy as far as like how give and receive love. But like, what are some of like the daily small things that you guys do for each other that really adds a lot of value to your relationship?
Yeah, I think something that I forget to do myself that's really helpful is every day be grateful for who this person is and what you guys have built, right? So we're constantly looking at what's lacking and what needs to change instead of what is good. And so I need to do that more. And I think if more people did that, they could at least see value in what they have, not just in the, only if it was like this, right? So seeing the glass as half full instead of empty.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much like a gratitude practice, right? And how does that work in relationships is exactly what you just said. Yeah, I would say also one of the practices for me is to, and it's a conscious practice. I mean, it's something I actually have to think about, but it's making sure that I'm showing John love in the way that he feels love. And I mean, yeah, this could be talked about in terms of, love languages, but I think when you know somebody really well and you know the way that they receive things, the way that they really hear things, and you put the effort into giving that love and acknowledgement to them in that way, in their way, I think that goes so much further. And just, yeah, it just goes so much further. It's so much more potent. And so it does take conscious work. I mean, it's not something that I can just do. Otherwise, I'll be doing it the way that I want to do it, right? If I leave it to the unconscious, but that to me can be so powerful, and it's actually not that hard. I mean, I say it takes work, of course, but it only takes a lot of work if you get to the point where you've got a huge deficit and you're trying to make up for the fact that your partner hasn't felt loved for X amount of time. It's kind of like going to the gym. It's like you go every day for 30, 45 minutes. That's a lot different than what we were talking about earlier, where you're like, oh my God, I've got type 2 diabetes and now I have to completely change my entire life. Those are very different approaches to life and to working out and to fitness. And I think relationships are the same. We actually look at relationships, I think, as a people, very much like I'll solve the problem when there's a problem. Right? It's like there's no problem until there's a problem. And that's not how it takes care. It takes daily care and tenderness and these things we have to actually put into practice every day, to kind of keep that garden flowing and growing.
What's interesting is it's so easy to do with our children, just being a new parent. And maybe because, we don't see them with ego but to say, okay, I'm going to do this because she likes it or it's her way or, she likes this type of shoe or clothes. Like, it's so easy to just give that to that child and not try to control it and not get in the way of that. But when it comes to our partners, it's so different. We definitely hold on to that tug of war rope and all of that.
And I think another problem that arises is something that you kind of hinted at, is that you are a family, you have kids, and I would imagine it's a lot easier for people who don't have kids to find time, quality time to spend together, to find time to work on the relationship, to find time to just show different signs of love to your partner like throughout the course of the week, would have been some of your best practices to make sure that you're scheduling like time throughout the week to make sure that you're, giving your partner an adequate amount of attention?
A shared Google Calendar and lots of communication. Here's date night. Here's where intimacy's in, all the stuff.
Yeah, we schedule it into our calendar, and John always says like he was never the person. He always said, "I'm never going to be that person that schedules sex, right? I'm not going to do it." And then you have kids, and you're like, "Oh, there's a lot of things that I said I'm never going to be that person about before I had kids that totally goes out the window when you have children." By the way, all those judgments that we walk around with of parents all the time. Trust me, when you're in it, you're like, "Oh shit, okay, the real." We'll put on the calendar like afternoon delight, like we've got a couple hours in between meetings, and she's at daycare or whatever, and we make it work that way. And shared calendar, yeah, that's a really good point. We actually do that, and it's more about being able to say, what does our day look like, and what are those in between breaks that we can take where we can connect, and whether it's like having lunch or whether it's John likes to call it 5 minutes, where we're like lay down on the bed or on the couch together and be like touching each other's body in some way, like even if it's shoulder to shoulder, and just connecting for 5 minutes, right? Just making it a priority to find those slivers throughout the day.
Doug, we got to wrap up because I just got a notification saying afternoon delight starts in 5 minutes.
All right. Well, perfect. Well, no,
Just kidding.
well, I guess like the last question I honestly even had though, I mean, all kidding aside, was I think this is an important topic to bring up because there's a lot of people that are in relationships that maybe they have no idea that their relationship has gotten stale. Like they have no idea that things just maybe aren't what it could be because they're just so busy and they're just kind of going through the motions. So what are a few signs that you've seen for people to like gain a better understanding to know if their relationship is stale?
For me, the answer has always been when you start to notice that you're breaking up with yourself.
Yeah, I was going to say disconnection from self.
Yeah, you're not addressing things. So what happens is internally you're disconnected. And so to me, that means something's wrong.
Yeah, it's this like the word that comes to mind is like malaise, right? It's like this just kind of like, oh, like I don't really feel any zest for life. I don't really feel like the desire to, let's say, do what I've always loved to do. Go hiking, connect with friends, work out, whatever your thing is. I think it can be a really good indication that you need to pause and question what's happening for you when you start to lose your zest for life, because usually it's not just you. Like usually that's an indicator that there's something bigger going on, in your relationships, and whether it's work, whether it's your romantic relationship. It's like your internal kind of barometer is trying to tell you like something's up that you should pay attention to, like things aren't balanced.
Love it. Like always being intentional with being aware of how you're feeling about yourself, I think is the key to life, right? Is self-awareness and knowing how you're feeling, knowing what your energy levels are like, knowing where you're, sacrificing your own integrity in certain parts of your life and like kind of what you can do to kind of improve that and heal that. And I really enjoyed chatting with you both. I think people are going to really dig this episode and they're honestly going to really appreciate your book. And what I'd like to do now is kind of give you guys an opportunity to mention like where can people buy the book? Where can people connect with you on social media if they want to learn more?
The book's wide, so anywhere, Amazon, Barnes, wherever you buy books. And then for me, it's just at The Angry Therapist across the board on social.
Yeah. The book is called It's Not Me, It's You, which is, we love our title. And it's my socials a little all over the place, but I'm just Vanessa S. Bennett on Instagram. And then at TikTok, I'm at the Coda Yoda. I talk a lot about healing from codependency. It's kind of my jam, moving into more of an interdependent way of relating. So those are the two biggest platforms that I'm on right now. But I share deeper stuff on my Instagram, but I do share a lot of codependency related stuff on my TikTok.
I also have an OnlyFans page. Should I give that out?
Oh man.
New news to me.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Two members.
That'd be bad if he admitted that on this episode, wouldn't it? I think there'd be some conflict resolution that would need to happen after we got off. But I will make sure to plug all the links to that stuff in the show notes. And for those listening, what I invite you to do is to share something you learned from this episode. Maybe it was something that was talked about with regards to navigating conflict in a healthier way. Maybe it was something that we chatted about as far as healing from childhood trauma. Maybe it was something we talked about as far as like attraction and like kind of what to look for in a partner and making sure you're going after the non-negotiables and not just the preferences. Whatever it was, whatever the takeaway was, make sure to tag John, tag Vanessa, tag myself because we'd love to hear your feedback. And we once again thank you for listening to this episode of The Adversity Advantage. I'm your host, Doug Bopst. We'll see you next time.